Hello and welcome to the independent lecture number 3 for the continuation of chapter 12. Please make sure you have your student lecture notes with you so that you can follow along, and also there are some spaces where you will need to fill in the blank. So chapter 12, just continuing from page 222, we will have a lab on Wednesday as well as a case study. So please email me prior to that, maybe by Tuesday afternoon. And if you have any questions about this material, especially for the case study, so that you are prepared to write it when I see you in lab on Wednesday. I will also be posting some animations on D2L that you can review, and this quiz will be closing on Monday of the long weekend, so make sure you get that quiz done before. So we're going to be looking at the heart, the cardiac cycle, and the conduction system of the heart, and also talking a little bit about blood pressure and pulse. So here's a real photo of a heart, and you can see the ventricles. You can also see the coronary circulation, so the vessels that supply the heart muscle itself, as well as many vessels here. And you'll get a chance in lab to look a little closer at an actual heart. So a review from case study number 2 and lab number 2. LORD is your acronym. So basically the left side of the heart carries oxygenated blood that's coming from the lungs. The right side of the heart carries deoxygenated blood having came from the rest of the body and your tissues and your systems, so the systemic circulation. Just to review the sequence of events for blood flow, we've got the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava drain into the right side of the heart. Start with the right atrium. Blood then moves into the right ventricle. Blood then leaves the heart from the right ventricle into the pulmonary arteries, because they're going to the lungs to obtain oxygen. So first starts with pulmonary trunk, and then it splits into pulmonary arteries going towards the lungs. You can see the capillary beds here in the lungs where exchange happens. Oxygen diffuses into the blood and carbon dioxide leaves the blood. The pulmonary veins carry the oxygenated blood back to the left side of the heart, the left atrium first, then the blood moves into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle pumps blood into the aorta, which is the largest artery in the body. So what is happening during a heartbeat? So when the heart beats, it's not that the whole entire heart and all 4 chambers are actually contracting at the same time. During a heartbeat, there are a sequence of events. So first we have the atria. Both left and right atria are contracting simultaneously, and then both left and right ventricles are contracting simultaneously. Now there's a delay, so the left and right atria will contract, there'll be a delay, and then the left and right ventricles will contract, and then all 4 chambers are relaxed simultaneously. Another term for contraction is systole, and the term for relaxation is diastole. So the sequence of events where the atria both contract together, and then the ventricles both contract together, and then all 4 chambers are relaxed, is actually known as one cardiac cycle, which is what occurs during a heartbeat. So a diagram from your textbook here will start off with early diastole, so all 4 chambers are still relaxed, and the right atria and the left atria are filling with blood. In later diastole, that blood that was filling each atria is moving into the right and left ventricles. You can see here that the AV valves are open to allow that passage of blood from the atrium to the ventricle, but the semilunar valves are closed. Next, we have atrial systole. So systole is contraction, so we have contraction of the atria. Simultaneously, both the left and the right sides, they contract, and they basically push the remainder of the blood into the ventricles. So there was some blood filling the ventricles during diastole, just passive filling, And then when the atria contract, they fill and they basically put the remainder of the blood into the ventricles. Again, the AV valves are still open here. There's a delay, and then during ventricular systole, the ventricles are contracting. The AV valves are going to close shut to prevent any backflow of blood into the atria. And the ventricles are starting their contraction in ventricular systole. The semilunar valves will open because the pressure is increasing here in these ventricles, and then blood will be ejected from the ventricles and will enter the arteries. From the left ventricle, it will be the aorta, and from the right ventricle, it will be the pulmonary trunk and pulmonary arteries. Then, once again, we enter early diastole, where all four chambers will once again be relaxed together, and then we start with the atria will start to passively fill with blood, receiving that blood from the veins. Okay, so that's known as a cardiac cycle. All those events are happening in one cardiac cycle and one heartbeat. What I'll do is for this sequence of events, I will post an animation on D2L, and that way you can sort of follow it step by step of what's happening within the heart and the blood flow. Heart sounds. So I touched upon this briefly in lecture number 2, where there are two distinct heart sounds that are described as lub and dub. So lub, dub. And heart sounds are caused by the closing of heart valves. So when the AV valves close, they'll close simultaneously. That closure of the valves will create a sound, and that is the first heart sound known as lub. Then when the semilunar valves close, that is the second heart sound known as dub. In order to hear or listen to heart sounds, one needs to use a stethoscope. So we listen to sounds with a stethoscope. So the first heart sound here depicted as S1 is the lub sound, and that's again associated with the closing of the AV valves. AV valves will start to close once the ventricles begin their contraction. Again, because you don't want blood to go from the ventricles back into the atria, so the AV valves will close to prevent that blood backflow. And when they close, that will create the first heart sound. As the ventricles start to contract, blood will move into the arteries, and as the ventricles then relax, the semilunar valves will close, and that's happening then during ventricular diastole, when there's not a whole lot of pressure in the ventricles to prevent the backflow of blood. The semilunar valve, so that is the aortic semilunar valve and the pulmonary semilunar valve, will close. That creates the second heart sound known as dub or dub. So lub, dub are the two heart sounds that are normally heard in the normal heart. We listen for heart sounds using a stethoscope. There is a video that I'll post on D2L for you to see and listen to those heart sounds. If somebody is diagnosed with a heart murmur, that means that there's an abnormal heart sound. And abnormal heart sounds occur when valves are not closing properly, and so that's known as a valve disorder. So again, in order to diagnose somebody with a heart murmur, you would listen to the heart and hear that the normal heart sounds are not there, that there's an abnormal heart sounds, and so you would diagnose that individual with a heart murmur, probably caused by a valve disorder. The intrinsic control of the heart. So the intrinsic means within the heart. If we were to take the heart muscle or the heart organ out of the body, it would actually be able to beat on its own for a certain amount of time before the cells die due to oxygen deprivation. That ability of the heart muscle to be able to contract on its own is called autorhythmic. So the cells, the muscle cells of the heart, are able to generate their own rhythm, and they're self-excitable. So they're actually able to generate action potentials which cause the muscle to contract. And generally the pace of the heart is set at about 70 beats per minute. Now we can alter that pace depending on if we're exercising or relaxed and we need to alter the pace of the pulse or the heart rate, but generally it's set at about 70 beats per minute. So this intrinsic ability of the heart to control its own rate is known as, or it's due to, the conduction system. So what the conduction system is groupings of specialized cells that are able to generate action potentials that causes the heart muscle to contract on its own. So there are 4 major regions of these specialized cardiac muscle cells or muscle fibers. The SA node is known as the pacemaker, so it actually sets the pace of the heartbeat. The atrioventricular node, the atrioventricular bundle, and lastly, the Purkinje fibers. So to look at a diagram here, we can see where each of these areas of specialized muscle fibers are found. The SA node is located on the upper wall of the right atrium. And so the SA node will fire and have an action potential. Cells within the SA node will generate action potential, and that electrical activity is shown here with these arrows. That electrical stimulation travels throughout the right atrium, also gets carried past and travels to the left atrium. That electrical activity will stimulate the muscles to contract. So if you remember from when you did the skeletal muscle, you didn't actually have the muscle contracting until you had a motor neuron send an impulse to the muscle. So same thing here, we actually need some sort of electrical excitability and an action potential in order for a muscle to contract. So the SA node fires first, meaning it generates an action potential. That electrical stimulation spreads across both atria, and then the atria would contract. But at the same time as that's happening, the signal is then sent to the AV node. So the AV node generates an electrical signal which then travels down what's called the AV bundle or bundle branches, traveling down the septum of the heart, and then into the Purkinje fibers which line the walls of the ventricles. Once the signal reaches the Purkinje fibers and the walls of the ventricles, then the ventricles will contract. And so that sequence of events and that electrical stimulation is shown here in this diagram. So we see it starting in green at the SA node, fires, it travels to the atria, then the atria will contract. But then the electrical signal continues down the septum through the AV bundle, and then lastly to the Purkinje fibers. So now the electrical signals spread throughout the ventricles, and then the ventricles contract. So without any kind of stimulation, the ventricles or the atria will not contract. They need this electrical stimulation. So that is what this conduction system is. It's a system within the heart of specialized cells that are able to generate electrical impulses to stimulate the heart muscles to contract. We can look and see how this conduction system is working by using what's called an ECG. So it's an electrocardiogram. It's a mapping of the electrical activity that's occurring within the heart. So if you look along the side here, it's measured in voltage, as all sort of electrical impulses and action potentials are. And we see this first wave is the P wave, and that represents the SA node firing. The QRS complex here represents the firing within the ventricles, and then the T wave represents the repolarization within the ventricles. These little video segments are actually the recording that I'm doing is actually only able to record 15 minutes at a time. So I'm going to end this recording and start a second one. So part 2 of this lecture will start here on this slide.